It is my pleasure to welcome you all and to welcome Susanna Noodlesman to this event today. Susanna holds a PhD in economics from the University of Buenos Aires, a master's in international relations at the Barcelona Institute of International Studies, and a certificate in international studies specializing in international economics at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. She works as a consultant member of the Argentine Council for International Relations and has collaborated with Think Tank 20 Argentina, has developed an important career in research and teaching at the University of Buenos Aires. Dr. Noodlesman has been awarded scholarships by the National Research Council of Argentina, Fulbright Commission, and the CIS Agency for Development and Cooperation, as well as the reason why we came in contact. She has been a visiting scholar and professor at various universities in the United States and has published articles on Latin American issues and served as a reviewer for economics journals. It is then my privilege to introduce to you Dr. Susanna Noodlesman, who will be presenting on exchange rates in Latin America. Please, Susanna.
Thank you so much for the invitation. The topics that we will cover today are the introduction, the economics of exchange rates, the political economy of exchange rates, a brief review of exchange rate policies in Latin America, and the conclusions. The exchange rate is a key price. Why? Is the exchange rate ratio between the currency of a country and the rest of the world, and it affects nominal and real variables. In Latin America, exchange rates are subject to the challenges not only of domestic variables, but also of external variables, such as fluctuations in commodity prices and capital flows. The traditional wisdom, the conventional wisdom, has mainly focused on technical solutions, but exchange rate policy is highly political. Exchange rates have implications not only in economic terms, but also in political economy terms. That is, exchange rate policies have distributional and electoral implications. So this session aims to answer the following questions. What were the main successes and errors of exchange rate policies in Latin America in the last years? How did the region cope with the past episode of external shocks? What is the relevance of exchange rates in the dynamics of economic and mainly of political cycles? And what main lessons can we draw into the future? So, as for the economics of exchange rates, as I have just said, the traditional literature is focused on mechanical aspects. The monetary stability and credibility attached to this, vis-a-vis the monetary flexibility. And there is a main concept in consistent trinity. If we look at this graphic, we see that policymakers confront three policy goals: full capital mobility on the basis. Here we have exchange rate stability, and on the other side, we have monetary independence. Policymaking cannot achieve the three policy goals at the same time. It's very understand this concept. If we are here, policy goal, if the policy goal is the exchange rate stability under full capital mobility, which is our present situation, policymakers will achieve this through fixed exchange. And the opposite occurs in the case policymakers want to achieve monetary independence. They combine monetary independence with floating exchange rates. Under full capital mobility, as visually we have seen, they cannot integrate all the policy goals. Here, we have the combination of this policy goal with this policy instrument, exchange rates, fixed exchange rates. We have here this policy goal with this instrument, floating exchange rates. A related concept of fixing and floating under inconsistent trinity is the issue of time inconsistency. Policymakers are tempted to promise certain goals of economic policy, for example, before they start their functions, and later diverge from these promises. In order to avoid this inconsistency between the promises and the policies instrumented later, fixity, that is fixing all nominal variables, provides a very powerful instrument of policy, of economic policy, in order to avoid this inconsistency. With fixed exchange rates, all variables are fixed: rate of interest, the quantity of money, the rate of exchange. Whereas in the case of the floating exchange rates, floating exchange rates allow to run an independent monetary policy. Nominal variables are not fixed, so it's possible to operate via the exchange rate, to increase the quantity of money, to decrease the rate of interest, and it's very useful because it provides flexibility to deal with internal and external shocks. If there is an external shock, authorities resort to the decrease of interest in order to stimulate the economy. Okay, time inconsistency avoids the manipulation of the policy making. And in the case of the optimum currency area, we have, for example, the case of Ecuador, El Salvador, Panama. They fix their currency to the currency of a stable country. In these cases, they fix the currencies vis-a-vis the dollar. It's convenient for these countries to integrate, to fix their currencies to a stable currency. In the case of the euro, for example, 27 countries have renounced to their currencies, and they are fixed. They have fixed to the euro. But the point that I want to stress today is that exchange rates are much more than all these concepts. Exchange rate include important trade-offs in terms of the choice and in terms of the level. So there are dilemmas, great big dilemmas. Regarding the choice, as we have just seen, the dilemma is between credibility and monetary stability vis-a-vis monetary flexibility. And in the case of the level, the dilemma is between purchasing power, that is the capacity of the consumers, of the residents, to buy more goods and services vis-a-vis the competitiveness. So the ability to produce competitive products, which is the interest of tradable producers. Which are the tradable producers? Exporters and import competitors. These two dilemmas in Latin America and in general in developing countries generally derive into one dilemma. Credibility vis-a-vis competitiveness. How were these dilemmas solved? Not only according to the structure of the different national economies, but also according to the nature of the domestic political economy. And as we have just said, these dilemmas entail distributional implications and electoral implications. That is, entail gains for some groups and losses for others, and exchange rate is a very important variable, a very important instrument, and politicians are tempted to manipulate exchange rates very often. Okay. We'll start first with the distributional and electoral implications of the choice, that is of the regime, to fix or to float, and later the implications, the distributional and electoral implications of the level, to appreciate or to depreciate. In the case of the distributional implications, we have here the interest groups at stake in the dilemma of credibility versus flexibility. The electoral implications refer to the role of political institutions. The distributional implications of the level refer to the impact of appreciations and depreciations on different actors. And in the case of the electoral implications, we will see the impact of political institutions of different preferences. Okay, first, what happened with the distributional aspects that focus on the interest groups? As we stressed just a few minutes ago, fixed does not allow depreciation. Just a clarification, depreciation refers to the lower value of the national currency, of the domestic currency, according to natural forces of the market. Devaluation is also the decrease of the value, but when the government intervenes. Okay, fixed exchange rates do not allow the depreciation. There is no monetary independence. Who are interested? Local financial and commercial sectors, multinational corporate affiliates, indebted in foreign exchange, sectors that are basically concerned with stability. So, fixed exchange rate provide stability, but reduce the capacity to respond to distributional pressures for political support. Okay. In the case of the floating exchange rates, they allow depreciations or devaluation. There is monetary independence, and this is the interest of tradable producers, export and import competitors, more concerned with monetary autonomy. That is, authorities can implement changes in order to favor some groups, some sectors. And the great advantage of the floating exchange rate is that provide capacity to respond to distributional pressures for political support. Here in the graphics, we see here the high level of the external debt of Latin America vis-a-vis Asia. These people are interested in fixed exchange rates. And here, the Bank of Mexico can run, in the case of the floating exchange rate, can run an independent monetary policy. Regarding the electoral aspects of the dilemma of credibility versus flexibility, that is to fix or to float, in the 70s, in the economies of the southern cone of Latin America, Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay, policymakers implemented orthodox policies, that is, policies that focused on the control of the quantity of money. No? First, also not only they focus not only on monetary variables, but also they focus on fiscal discipline. It also strong governments, because when economies face an external shock, and because the fixed exchange rate only focus on fixed exchange rates only focus on the external equilibrium, in case of an external shock, all the adjustment is undertaken by the domestic economy. So only strong governments can instrument this. And the literature also stresses that autocracies and opaque regimes are prone to fixed exchange rates. The opposite occurs in the case of floating exchange rates. Left-wing parties are concerned about employment and inequality, and governments can please them, can satisfy their demands. In federal system, where more voices than only one voice are heard, and in democratic regimes. So we are going now to the level. We are going to see first the distributional aspects and later the electoral aspects. In the real depreciation or the real devaluation, the value of the domestic currency decreases. So exporters, for example, can sell much more products. Exports increase, imports decrease. This is convenient for exporters of sugar, oil, aluminum, coffee, etc. It's convenient for them, it's convenient for the balance of payments. So the government can satisfy the demands of these sectors. But imports are more expensive, so, and imports, and Latin America import many inputs, so the power, the purchasing power of the economy falls. And the opposite is in the case of the appreciations. Here, exports are more expensive, imports are cheaper, we have an increase in trade deficit, can reduce the inflation. It improves the purchasing power of consumers, but reduces the competitiveness of the local tradable producers. Exporters are not so okay, and producers of goods that compete with imports also are not so happy. In the case of the electoral aspects of the level, we have real appreciation and real depreciation. Governments are tempted to postpone devaluations because devaluations are very unpopular, because the purchasing power of the local residents falls. So they are prone to delay the depreciations. But many appreciations are unsustainable. So what happens is that the postponement of the depreciations avoids the unpopularity of the devaluation, avoids the fall of the purchasing power, but at the cost of incubating an even more severe exchange rate crisis, because the appreciation, an excessive appreciation, puts a great pressure on the external sector. So very briefly, we are going to see the Latin American exchange policies. No? Okay. These trade-offs are central to policy making. As we have seen, the main dilemma has been, in many cases, on many occasions, credibility versus competitiveness. Some countries were more concerned or are more concerned about the level because they want to increase competitiveness. Others are more concerned about the regime because they want, they are in search of macroeconomic stability. And on many occasions, the macroeconomic the policy went from, in one country, no? Went from one goal to another goal, depending on the domestic and the external conditions. In the aftermath of the Great Depression, beginning in the 30s, Latin American countries undertook the import substitution industrialization policy. They made a substitution of the products that imported. And the appreciated exchange rate maintained low prices for intermediate inputs and capital goods. Manufacturers were highly protected. They didn't care about competition. Exchange rate, these dilemmas were not so strong as later. Since the 80s, most Latin American countries became more open. And with the liberalization process of this, that these countries implemented, the trade-offs emerged more strongly. But okay, it was usual that manufacturers, not anymore protected by specific measures, had stronger incentives to push for devaluations. The correlation between real devaluations and inflation became more evident. I myself have an econometric study about the strong correlation of Latin America in this context. In the 90s, fixed and semi-fixed stabilization policies were applied. So the fixed and semi-fixed policies were okay, were a powerful tool to fight against inflation. But it was a very important tool in terms of the political economy, because these societies went from dictatorships to democracies. So governors were interested in favoring or satisfying the demands of societies. And appreciations produce important increases in purchasing power. In the 90s, there was a wave of vast capital inflows. The inflow of such an amount of capital flows produced an appreciation of the local currencies. That is, capital inflows, the abundant supply of external currency experienced a decrease, and the domestic currency experienced an appreciation, an increase. But the appreciation was particularly important where fixed and semi-fixed exchange were used because authorities couldn't change the parity. At the same time, economic policies were not very responsible. So these economies, I am speaking on average, experience fiscal and current account deficit, and Mexico with the tequila effect, Brazil with the caipirinha effect, and Argentina with the tango effect experience costly crisis in economic and social terms. Costly financial crisis. Financial crisis is the combination of currency crisis plus banking crisis. The issue here is that with the openness of these economies, economic actors became very exposed to volatility and appreciation, and exchange rate became very politicized. So sectors push for different demands. Again, the characteristics of the countries have determined how these trade-offs were solved. What did policymakers learn from these episodes of fixing exchange rate? That appreciation is pro-cyclical. The appreciation, an excessive appreciation, cannot counteract in case of an external shock. Authorities cannot change the rate of interest or the quantity of money of the economy. And also, policymakers understood that exchange rate flexibility is crucial to overcome external shocks. The era of the 90s became popular because of the large capital inflows, but the literature has also named the other phenomenon, the phenomenon of sudden stop of capital inflows, because the capital is also pro-cyclical. When the capital understands that the conditions in the countries where they were sent are not so okay, they leave these countries. The 2000 brought promising prospects for Latin American economies. Latin American faced during the period 2003-2007 excellent external conditions. The better regional performance was a mix of good fortune and good policies. External conditions in terms of commodity prices, abundant flows of capital, booming trade, and remittances of Latin American workers working abroad and sending money to their countries were very favorable for these economies. But policymakers also instrumented very good policies: accumulation of foreign reserves, progress in monetary systems, the reduction of debt denominated in foreign, but basically greater exchange rate flexibility. This was a lesson that policymakers understood very well. And with a mix of good fortune and good policies, Latin America was able to face the global financial crisis without originating a systemic crisis. And this is a great difference with what happened in the past. For example, in the years of the lost decade, the 80s. We have here a high growth period, the first decade of the 2000, high growth. From the 2000 onward, Latin America applied greater exchange rate flexibility. The practice of accumulating international reserves has also become widespread. And also they intervene in the markets to avoid, in the last years of the 90s, depreciation, excessive depreciation, and they intervened in order to avoid appreciations because of the high commodity prices. But things were not so perfect. That is, Latin American policies improved basically in terms of the external sector, but not in terms of the fiscal sector. Latin America, again, I am talking about, I am presenting an average. Latin America spent the commodity price boom, and public sector balances resulted much more from the booming revenues than from the austerity of fiscal policies. So Latin America became vulnerable to changing external conditions. In any case, the exchange rate performed much better than in the past. It ended to be an amplifying sector of external shocks, to be an absorption factor. It was able to compensate the external shock, but the fiscal discipline was not so good. So we are going to present the anatomy of the commodity supercycle. The supercycle of the commodities, that is the boom in the prices of the commodities, has produced an unsustainable domestic demand boom and price windfalls, that is unexpected gains that came from the very favorable terms of trade and from the appreciation of the exchange rate. So the increase of the purchasing power, because the high revenues of the commodity prices and the increase of the purchasing power because of the real appreciation caused an increase in the demand. But it overhead the economy and widened the current account deficit. The supply was not so, couldn't accommodate the excess of demand. So the excess of demand and the excess of demand of the past restricted the policies that came later. So the terms of trade, the index of export prices vis-a-vis the import prices were booming in the first decade of the 2000. Here we have the levels, the bars are the levels, and this is the trend. From 2003 until 2011, they increased and they started to fall. And the increase in the real GDP, the gross domestic product of the commodity exporters was of 4.5 in the first decade of the 2000, vis-a-vis 2.3 of the 90s. The situation of the non-commodity exporters was not so favorable. So there was an increase in the purchasing power because of the terms of trade, and also because of the real appreciation. I remind you that the nominal appreciation, the nominal variables refer only to nominal variables. And in the case of the real exchange rate, we have the nominal, that is the parity between two currencies, the price of the good abroad, or the basket of goods, vis-a-vis the prices of the basket of goods at home. So the windfalls have produced a sort of mirage. The mirage can be real if in case the terms of trade are permanent, which is usually not the case. The mirage may never become reality. This is the reality. This is the case of the history of terms of trade in Latin America. And productivity of the economy, basically of the tradable sector, was not accommodating, was not performing so well. So in terms of the political economy, it's always optimal that low-income groups maximize their consumption of a windfall. This is a very valuable goal of the political economy, and particularly because in the first decade of the 2000s, they face an increase in social indicators vis-a-vis what happened in the 90s. The neoliberal policies were not so favorable for low-income groups. But the problem is here, the trade-off is that even though one thing is okay for political economy, another thing happened with the macroeconomic policy making. It is optimal to avoid unsustainable consumption booms. So what have policymakers learned? In case of a favorable terms of trade shock, is important to evaluate the cost of the appreciation vis-a-vis the political economic cost. And one important point is that redistributive policies financed by the commodity boom with budget deficits only work in the short term and with high commodity prices. Poverty and inequality started to deteriorate by the end of the commodity boom. This is the terms of trade index. The maximum, the peak was in 2011. Here, they experienced a great fall. They recovered, but in the years of the recovery of the terms of trade, the GDP of these economies did not reach the same levels of the first decade of the 2000s. And the problem later we had the pandemic, so the not appropriate policies of the past restricted the policies that came later. Anyway, exchange rate, the external sector discipline in the last year and also in this year are okay. Most currency depreciated, so there is flexibility of the exchange rates. Policymakers have instrumented measures to alleviate the volatility of exchange rates. And Latin America, on average, was also able to increase international reserves. The idea that I want to give is that the external sector exchange rates are not isolated. They are connected to other policies, to the fiscal policies, for example. So the pandemic has made structural problems visible while reinforced negative trends in growth, employment, and income distribution. Latin America has still an opportunity to integrate more into the global chains, to invest more in sustainable investment, etc., to diversify the exports. The great conclusions of this presentation is that political economic factors are very important, are key to explain exchange rates. In the last years, Latin American policies improved. and exchange, in particular, exchange rate policies minimize the impact of external shocks. But Latin America also spent the gains caused by the commodity boom while maintaining their dependence on such products. Redistributive policies financed by the commodity boom and with budget deficit only work in the short term and with high commodity prices, and weak economic and political institutions affect economic growth and make economies more prone to cycles of boom and bust, which in turn exacerbate social, economic, and political tensions.
Great. Well, thank you. A lot. That's a lot to think about. You know, one of the, as you were reaching the end there and talking about the political economy aspects, I was thinking about, you know, in what order do you see exchange rates, let's say, as flags or indicators correlated to a particular, you know, is there any sort of correlation to a particular political inclination or regime? Is there such a, do you see any sort of relation of that nature?
Okay, in the past, there were, okay, the characterization that I made of the 70s did not, this is a phenomenon of the 70s. In the 90s, all kind of societies of, I am talking about Latin America, democratic societies also applied exchange rates. So the characterization that I presented is a very, very broad characterization. The reality stays in the middle. Okay, in the case of the euro, you can see total fixity. In the case of the United States, Canada, you can see total floating exchange. In Latin America, you have a mixed. And I also have a paper that studies on, that focuses on the diverse regimes of Latin American countries. There is a mixture. Okay, this is also connected to the international monetary system. It is not one thing to fix in the era of the gold standard, when it is one thing to fix in an international context where many countries are in this currency area. It is different than implementing a fixed exchange regime in the context of floating exchange rates at the international level. That is, from Bretton Woods on, we have first from 1945 until 1973, we have fixed exchange, but adjustable. It was possible to adjust. And from 73 up to today, we have an international system which is characterized by floating exchange rates. So it is one thing to fix the exchange rates in a context of total fixity in a great currency area, than is different from fixing the exchange rate in the context of an international monetary system that applies floating exchange rates. Even though we have, that is each country can choose. So what I want to stress is that there are domestic characteristics, but also international characteristics that showing that appreciation can be very inconvenient. That is the fixity, the excessive appreciation, that is the total fixity. This is the idea that I want to give. The total fixity can be very costly in economic terms and also in social terms. In economic terms, because it incubates an even greater crisis when everything explodes. And in social terms, because the increase of the purchasing power in an excessive appreciation is artificial, and the devaluation or depreciation that comes later complicate things, and devaluations are costly, and people from Latin America understand it very well. Unfortunately, in my country, there have been many depreciations, devaluations, etc., very costly.
I see Marla raised her hand, Marla Ripoll, from our economic department. Welcome,
hi.
Marla.
Yes,
Marla,
hi.
okay.
Hi, Susana. Thank you for your presentation. I liked your historic perspective on the evolution of exchange rates and in the history of the different periods of development in Latin America. I'm from Colombia, by the way. And
very good.
yeah, so on the last part, which I think it's brings us more to what's going on more in the 21st century in Latin America.
Yes.
I agree with your assessment that since most countries have opted for more flexible exchange rates, then the exchange rate issues that we saw in the past, where, as you said, there will be a fixed exchange rate that will not be sustainable, that will eventually end up with a big crisis, a big devaluation. We don't see so much those things anymore. But then also the 21st century, in addition to this movement to flexible exchange rates, also coincides with the commodity boom that you spoke about, and how economic growth was went at a fast pace at all those countries that could export commodities. Now, it seems like the change of the century also brought about a shift of the problems. As you said, exchange rates are not creating these amplification problems anymore. But now that we get a resource boom, the issue with that was that countries spend it, as you pointed out. So a couple of thoughts there. So sometimes Chile is mentioned as one of the countries that has been able to think about how to smooth out these windfalls of revenue that come with with these exports, and maybe it would be an invitation to other countries in Latin America to try to implement systems where the export gains from terms of trade increases are not spent immediately. On the other hand, there is also the political part that kind of connects to your talk, right? So we get a windfall of export revenue. There is a government in power. Fiscal spending is pro-cyclical in this country. So instead of being counter-cyclical, meaning trying to help when there is a crisis, when there is a boom and there is a lot of revenue, governments spend. Because politically, if you have more revenue and there is so much need to spend, you spend, right? So that's, I think, the issue that is going on right now, that the lack of discipline on having these funds to smooth out the consumption makes it really tempting for policymakers to just spend more when there is more, which is not the way fiscal policy works in the developed world. So it seems more like now it is these domestic issues that are coming out again as you know, there is lack of productivity growth, there is lack of more fundamental things that actually drive economic growth. Yes. So that when there is not a trade boom, the economy can still be productive. So just some thoughts and maybe your reaction.
Yes, of course. As you very well mentioned, Chile had a very good policy in terms of fiscal variables. The idea is to implement a Keynesian paradigm. The literature, I have read a very interesting paper distinguishing between liberal Keynesianism and social Keynesianism. This paper explains that in the case of these countries, like Latin American countries, they apply much more social Keynesianism. The spending was not counter-cyclical, because the Keynesian paradigm stresses the importance of saving in the booms.
That's right, yeah.
That's right. So that on average, also Jose Antonio Ocampo has lots of papers showing all the comparisons, no? How spending in Latin America did not behave so well, so appropriately. So yes, I want to stress again the idea that that is the unsustainable demand boom, the unsustainable expansion of the demand was not accompanied by an increase of the productivity, basically of the tradables, because the appreciation requires the increase of the productivity of the tradables. So there was an overheating of the non-tradables, producing an excess of demand. The appreciation also produced negative effects on the external sector. So economies became very vulnerable. So this is the idea that external policies are related to fiscal policies. We cannot study exchange rate policies independently from the fiscal variables. But as we can have seen, exchange rates ended to be an amplifying factor of the shocks, as in the years of the lost decade, in the 80s. And all the literature stresses the great performance of these countries in the global financial crisis. This was unusual for our countries. And yes, policymakers always want to respond to the demands of the societies, particularly when these societies made an important transition from dictatorships to democracies. And this is something that perhaps we have to stress, no? That on average, okay, and more than an average, they are democratic societies, more democratic than in the past.
Oh, there's one question in the chat. If just very briefly, if you can respond to Greg Yost, who asked if you could disaggregate the notion of Latin American economies. That is, there are outliers that move the overall numbers one way or the others, or are there patterns? Are the patterns pretty much the same throughout the economies in the continent? Or?
Okay, as we just talked minutes before the session, this is a great panorama. We need perhaps more time in order to disaggregate, because as I was presenting in the evolution of the terms of trade, the commodity exporters were very favored in the first decade of the 2000. And this, the graphic that I presented refers to 10 countries, So the non-commodity exporters didn't face the same situation. Latin America is a very, very heterogeneous region. I was trying to present a very general panorama because I cannot deepen so much in only 1 hour. And what I want to stress is the importance of implementing responsible policies. Now, commodity prices now are increasing again. I have attended a very interesting conference of Otaviano Canuto. He's a Brazilian economist. He has been working in the World Bank, in the International Monetary Fund. He has very interesting papers. He has a very interesting blog. And he was explaining that we still don't know if we are entering a new cycle. I think the pandemic will stop again. Someday will stop. And if the commodity prices go up, it's important for policymakers to understand the importance of running responsible policies. That is the idea.
Well, thank you. And perhaps this, this leads us to the possibility of working on this in this area in the future and with more specific focus or foci. It could be more than one. So I welcome the possibility of thinking about that, Susana, if we may, in the future, or thinking about more specifics, other aspects that might go at that question, which is, I think, very important for those of us who pay attention to Latin America and to the wide disparities in terms of sizes, populations. I mean, just as you described it, the heterogeneity of Latin America. And thank you very much, Susana, for your time and for your thought and the presentation. Once again, I will reiterate my appreciation for everybody who is here with us today, and especially for Dr. Nudelsman. Susana, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.